scholarship corruption and the identity politics. Recently even seen the ousting of presidents in Harvard, MIT, and Penn. There are these politicians, bureaucrat elites, the higher echelons who are interconnected on the top.
I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric.
Withhold a huge sum of money. And so the universities buckle to the pressure of white Jewish supremacist billionaires who are using their immense financial wealth.
I know.
The absence of a footnote citation is enough to...
Alan Dershowitz. Yeah.
I start to read your book, Mr. Dershowitz. Footnotes 10, footnote 11. You see, you don't know what you're talking about, and that's pretty terrible. She coined the phrase turnspeak. He uses the phrase, quote, George Orwell's turnspeak. Turnspeak is not Orwell, Mr. Dershowitz.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about these academics. I mean, you have written the book, I'll Burn That Bridge when you've written this book. And you have mentioned about the scholarship corruption and the identity politics and the radical politics. And you also recently mentioned about careerism and opportunism. All these kind of things are now emerging in the academic hemisphere, and we are suffering from this. I myself, in my country, also suffer from this and speak out against this, where there is a culture of show-off education now. And we have recently even seen the ousting of presidents in Harvard, MIT, and Penn.
And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, targeted at an individual.
It's targeted at Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them? Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism? I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric.
And is it anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
And the respect academics are losing because of this oligarchic capitalist system, oligarchic militant capitalist system, where there are these politicians, bureaucrat elites, the higher echelons who are interconnected on the top, and they are, controlling these academic institutions to the way they like. And then we have many academics on the seats who like to use the words, who worship money and worship the chairs. They worship the politicians, the chairs as well. So this kind of things that are emerging in the academic institutions, which is weakening our academic institutions. How can we change this? What is the way forward on this?
I think one has to always look at the picture in the whole. It's important not to just look at one side or look at the other side. So in the case of academia, you see two phenomena going on at the same time. On the one hand, there is a handful of white Jewish supremacist billionaires who are using their immense financial wealth to try to crush the student demonstrations on the college campuses. And not just the student demonstrations in the college campuses. They even contacted the mayor of New York and demanded that he crush the demonstrations, or they wouldn't support him in the forthcoming mayoral election. They have huge amounts of money. That's a consequence of the fantastic polarization of wealth in our society, such that for them, $50 million, literally, this is not an exaggeration, $50 million here William Ackman tells Harvard, I'm going to withhold my $50 million contribution. Another academic tells the University of Pennsylvania, he was a graduate of the Wharton School of Business, he's going to withhold $100 million. Another figure, Sternlicht, he tells Brown University, these are all Ivy League universities, that he's going to withhold a huge sum of money. There's Kraft. He tells Columbia University he's going to withhold a huge sum of money. And so the universities buckle to the pressure. They march to the beat of the Jewish supremacist drum. And it was a very ugly picture. It was the most brutal, vicious, and undisguised assault on academic freedom by a private entity in American history. There's never been anything like it. Two Ivy League university presidents were toppled. The rest were terrified. People like Shafiq, President Shafiq at Columbia, the president of MIT. The MIT president held back. She was actually quite good, but then she buckled to the pressure also.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
It's a context-dependent decision. That's your testimony today. Calling for the genocide of Jews is depending upon the context. That is not bullying or harassment. This is the easiest question to answer yes, Ms. McGill. So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If it if the
yes
speech
or
becomes
no?
if the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? The speech is not harassment. This is unacceptable, Ms. McGill. I'm going to give you one more opportunity for the world to see your answer. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct when it comes to bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
It can be harassment.
The answer is yes.
So that was a very ugly phenomenon. But then we have to see the other side, which is, as I said earlier, the students stood their ground and risked quite a lot. In the United States, Columbia University, for example, it costs $80,000 a year. It's not a small sum of money. And students were willing to risk losing all their semester's credit, being suspended, being expelled. So there was, on the one side, the brutal, vicious assaults, and on the other, there was the very heroic, principled, courageous resistance. As to the question what you can do about it, I don't personally believe you can do very much about it. These kinds of tendencies, the succumbing, the giving in to careerism, opportunism, the desire for really in the great scheme of things, it's pretty petty stuff. The desire to be invited to a conference, to attend a wine and cheese party, to get a guest lectureship, pretty small stuff.
Yes.
But in academia, those are big things.
Yes.
Henry Kissinger, the archetypical academic war criminal, he once said, the battles in academia are so vicious because the stakes are so puny. And I think there is some truth to that you really are fighting over nothing. Academics will loathe and hate each other
Yes.
because one forgot or decided not to cite the other in a footnote.
Yes,
A footnote.
I know.
The absence of a footnote citation is enough to,
Alan
it's the-
Dershowitz. Yeah.
it's equivalent of dropping an atomic bomb in academic life. It's
Yes.
so stupid.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
think that's kind of built into the system.
Published a book called From Time Immemorial. The book was universally recognized by serious scholars to be a fraud. Without wanting to toot my own horn, I'm widely recognized as the person who exposed the fraud. I know that book inside out. I read it at least 4 times, and I went through all 1,854 footnotes. I started to read your book, Mr. Dershowitz. I then came to Chapter 1, footnotes 10, footnote 11, footnote 12, footnote 13, footnote 14, footnote 15, footnote 16. All of the quotes are from Joan Peters. They are so from Joan Peters that you have a long quote here from Mark Twain on pages 23 to 24. I turn to Joan Peters, page 159 to 60. The identical quote from Twain with the ellipses
Is
in
the
ellipses
Twain quote, is the Twain quote wrong?
with the ellipses.
Is the Twain
Let me
quote
finish,
wrong?
sir.
No, but the key
with
is
the ellipses in the same places. The identical quote from Twain with the ellipses in the same places.
It's been widely quoted, as you know.
Really,
Now-
Mr. Dershowitz?
No, what's your point? Is it a correct quote?
Let me finish, Mr. Dershowitz.
I want to ask
We
you a
then
question.
have
Is it a direct? Is it an
I'm-
accurate
okay.
quote of Twain? Did Twain say what
Professor
I
Dershowitz,
quote him as
the way
saying?
we
Dershowitz,
the way
you
we
have
can
to let
have
me finish.
the way we can have a civilized
You have a
discussion
quote-
here is that each person will get a chance
You
to
have
make their point
nearly
and
a-
won't be cut off. So
You have nearly a full-page quote from one William Young, a British consul from May 1839.
Is it an accurate
on page 8? I'm going to finish, sir. On page 18 of your book, I turn to Joan Peters, page 184, the identical quote with the ellipses. I'm holding it up for the camera. Perhaps they can see. This is the length of the quote. The
Is it an
ellipses-
accurate quote?
The ellipses in the identical place. Last point. I'm not going to go through Chapter 2, where there are 29 plagiarisms from Joan Peters.
Wait.
All
Let's be
care-
very clear. It
all
is not
carefully-
plagiarism to
Yeah.
quote Mark Twain correctly.
Except
That's not
except if you
plagiarism.
cite Mark Twain and not Joan Peters. I'm a professor, sir. I know what plagiarism is.
And plagiarism
Sir,
is? Well, let's hear your definition
listen,
of plagiarism.
No, we're not going to get involved
No, we're
with
not
that
going to
now.
get. So you're using a word, and you're not going to tell us what you
I'm
mean
going to
by
give the
it.
documentation, and you know what? We'll let everybody else decide for themselves, because
Okay.
the documentation. One last example, and I want to make it very clear. In Joan Peters' book, From Time Immemorial, she coins a phrase. The phrase is turn speak. And she said,
No, she borrows it from.
No,
she borrows
sir,
it from. Who is
sir,
it?
I'm
No,
sorry.
she attributes it and borrows it from
Sir,
somebody else.
I'm
It's not her own
sorry.
phrase.
She coins the phrase. You see, you don't know what you're talking about. And that's pretty
not her
terrible. She coined the phrase "turn speak," and she says she's using it as a play off of George Orwell, which, as all listeners know, used the phrase "newspeak."
Right.
And she coined her own phrase, "turn speak." You go to Mr. Dershowitz's book. He got so confused in his massive borrowings from Joan Peters that on 2 occasions, I'll cite them for those who have a copy of the book, on page 57 and on page 153, he uses the phrase, quote, George Orwell's turn speak. Turn speak is not Orwell, Mr. Dershowitz. You're the Felix Frankfurter Chair at Harvard.
Yes.
You must know that Orwell would never use such a clunky phrase as turn speak.
I like it. I think it's a very elegant
well,
phrase.
maybe you like
Yeah,
it, and
I do.
evidently Joan Peters liked it, but George Orwell never heard of it, to the best of my knowledge.